Hello and welcome to episode 140 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And thanks for joining us on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing journeys, find out how they got into the industry and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And if this is your first episode, welcome. We've just had a series of episodes speaking to industry experts, agents, editors, even Hollywood managers, and going further back, we've spoken to some amazing authors and screenwriters. We've spoken to people like Joe Abercrombie, Fonda Lee, Ed McDonald, Alex Garland. So please do check out the back catalogue. I'm sure you'll find some names of interest in there. But this week, we're kicking off this new batch of episodes with a really great guest.
Yeah, this week we're chatting with the awesome Scott Lynch, who is a fantasy author, and his debut novel is The Lies of Locke Lamora, which is one of Marco's favourite ever books. And
it's genuinely.
It's a really fantastic chat, and Scott's had a really interesting route into the industry, which is, I think, maybe the only person we've spoken to with this kind of unusual route, and another great example of how you create your own luck in these situations. Yeah,
absolutely. He tells us all about it, how he was discovered, and he, in many ways, his rise was kind of viewed as this sort of precocious youth with a great breakthrough success, because he was first published when he was 26. But as he tells us, that was after 10 years of hard work as a writer. Yeah. So even when it looks like someone's had this massive breakthrough from nowhere, there's always a big pile of big body of work behind that gets you to that
There's
position.
No such thing as a true overnight success. I think there's always a background there. And
as you said, Tarek, Lies of Locke Lamora is genuinely one of my favourite books. It's probably the book that got me back into fantasy as an adult reader. It's just brilliant characters set in this really interesting world that sort of mirrors a medieval Venice in some way, with a smattering of magic across the top. And I've seen it build as sort of Ocean's 11, the fantasy version, and it does have that whole heist element to it as well, which makes it a really compelling read. But we talked to Scott all about it, how he came up with the character Locke Lamora, and also, I know if you're a Scott Lynch fan, you'll be eagerly awaiting this. We talked to him about what's coming next, because we have been waiting for the fourth book in the series, Thorn of Emberlane, for some time. He talks to us about that, what we can expect from that and when, and also about 3 novellas set in that world that will be coming out. He hoped that the first one would be coming out in the coming year. So, really exciting news, and just a really interesting and fun guy to speak with. But we'll get straight into it after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop, so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy, and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page 1.
Did you always want to be a writer? Because I think I read that you wanted to be a musician or a comic book artist when you were younger. Is that right?
Yes, I went through every phase. Yes, I wanted to be a writer for a very long time, long before I knew what that meant. Back when I was a kid, I wanted to write choose your own adventure novels. Yeah. That was the height of literature as far as my 7 or 8-year-old self was concerned. So I knew that I wanted to write books, but I also wanted to be a cartoonist, and I also wanted to drive a truck, and I also wanted to fly F-15s. And then when I hit my teen years, I kind of focused on comic books for a couple of years, and I had this fantasy that I was also going to be a musician, which was completely scuppered by the fact that I have no musical talent whatsoever. And that was the pipe dreamiest of pipe dreams. I can't, I simply can't. I love music, but I'm not equipped to produce it. So I spent a couple of years thinking that I was going to be a comic book self-publisher. And this is many, many years ago now, when that was a hip and cool thing to be, rather than a fairly standard sort of thing to be. And that was my teenage rock and roll rebellion dream, was to get into the lucrative field of self-publishing black and white comic books. But fortunately or unfortunately, my artistic focus, I kind of I hit a plateau with my illustration, and B, I didn't have the discipline required to get myself off of it. So I just kind of lazied myself into plan B, which was writing, which I could actually stick to and, actually do for 10 to 12 hours at a time, and complete big projects in a way that I could not finish art projects when I was a teenager. So you could say that, yes, out of sheer lack of talent and sheer lack of discipline, I did land very firmly in the camp of, gee, I always wanted to be a writer. I was fortunate to like a lot of things, I suppose, and to still end up doing one that I really, really wanted to. Yeah. I mean, there are relatively more limited slots for things like astrophysicists in the world. So, I didn't choose a particularly demanding career path in some respects.
And when was it that you kind of went from thinking, oh, this is actually what I'd like to do, to thinking, actually, I can turn this into an actual job, I can make a living off this? What was the kind of thought process there?
I think it was probably about age 15. I mean, one thing has always been true, and I'm going to try not to have this sound as mystical or as highfalutin. I always knew that I was going to be a creator, Garth Marenghi, shaman, dreamweaver, visionary, and author. But I always wanted to make stuff. I always knew that making stuff was going to be it since a very young age. It's just that what the stuff that I was going to make would end up being was always kind of in a state of flux. Until I was about 15. 15 is when I started reading. 14, 15 is when I started reading a lot more adult science fiction. That's when I moved on into science fiction and fantasy from what I had been reading up to that point was largely Doctor Who novelizations, right. And then the Doctor Who New Adventures, because I was a weird little American boy who fell in love with this weird little British television program when I was about 10 or 11. Was it easy
to watch in the US at that time?
Well, it was on PBS all the time, and
right.
I'd seen it here and there. And sorry, this is the briefest of segues. I'll get back to the actual point of the question in a moment. I did not actually fall in love with the program by watching it on TV. I found the novelizations at my local public library. So I had this entire summer when I was about 11 where I just plowed through all these Target novelizations from 30 or 40 years ago. And so I built up this weird image of what the show looked like in my head. And then eventually I started watching it when PBS started airing all the Tom Baker episodes again, and it looked nothing like the Doctor Who universe in my head. And it took some reconciliation, but I did eventually come to love it. But those were kind of my gateway to a lot of literature, and then I branched out from there into the new adventures novels in the very early '90s, and from there into adult science fiction, Dune, Neuromancer, The Forever War.
Yeah.
And I started reading a lot more Stephen King, and I eventually got into fantasy by way of people like Ray Feist. So I knew, even if I was still deluding myself, by the time I was about 15, that I was probably not going to make it in the comic book field. But writing was probably going to be it.
Yeah.
And so in fits and starts, half realizing what I was doing, that's what I focused on and started trying to move forward with. And it only took 11 more years after that. I mean, that's the thing. I sold my first novel when I was 26, which usually elicits groans of, "Ooh, you were such a prodigy.
Yeah.
What happened?" That's the part everybody's interested in. Ooh, sell a novel in your 20s, but nobody wants to hear the part about how that was an 11-year interregnum from deciding that I was going to be a writer to actually becoming a writer, which is actually not that vast an interregnum as far as those things go. I mean, nobody wants to hear about the lengthy period of time you spend sucking and failing to actually acquire minimal competence at what you're trying to do. So yeah, I was still lackadaisical and undisciplined and unfocused in a lot of ways, but I was blessed to kind of realize mostly what I wanted to do and to sort of start lurching toward it at a relatively young age.
And when you were doing that lurching, were you trying to get things published at that time before Lies came along? Was there any other novels before that you tried to get published?
I was, and I had this notion back when I was a teenager, back when I was in my early 20s, that there was a distinct plan and a progression of events that had to take place. That first, I was going to do, like fan work, reviews,
Mm-hmm.
etc. I wrote a bunch of reviews for a gaming website, God, a quarter century ago now. And I thought that, okay, that's the first part completed, and next I'm going to start doing freelance jobs for tabletop role-playing companies, and I'll do freelance editing, and then I'm going to write and sell short stories, and then I'll sell a novella, and then I'll work my way up. Like I imagined that the path was a clear progression, like video game levels,
Yeah.
from little pieces to bigger pieces. And then a that is bullshit. That's not what needs to happen, and that's definitely not what happened to me. I mean, it was a full 5 years between selling my first novel and selling my first short story professionally thereafter. I there, it's easy to say, oh, I did things ass backwards, but the fact is that there is no formula to follow. There's no path to take. There's nothing to take backwards or forwards. It's you do what you do, whenever you get there. An awful lot of brilliant writers have sold their first novels in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and a lot of brilliant writers stopped writing as teenagers. Every time I feel particularly accomplished, I think of Arthur Rimbaud, one of my favorite poets. Stopped writing poetry when he was 17, the fucker. Pardon my language, but you must sort of conceive the notion. There was a metaphor that somebody used in conversation this summer that I really, really liked. In order to preserve as much of your sanity as you possibly can, you kind of have to conceive the notion that you're not in competition with anybody else. I mean, in a certain sense, you are. But in an absolute sense, like in an artistic sense and in a sales sense, you're not actually in competition with anybody else, because nobody else can have your precise career. Nobody else can make your precise artistic impact. It's not like playing football. It's like playing golf.
Mm-hmm.
Because in golf, there's a score, but you can't physically interfere with what anybody else is doing. So ultimately, you are just playing in an effort to better yourself and do better than you did last time. And that's the only sane and sensible path to build in your head toward whatever you want to be writing or you want to be producing in the world. So I was dead wrong. And the thing is, I don't know if it set me back, because it's not like I was producing a huge volume of brilliant unheralded material at the time, but you know, I clung very tenaciously to this idea that there was a shape and that there was a procedure to be followed, and I was going to follow it, and that ended up being completely inaccurate.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask about that because I think I'm right in saying that your sort of breakthrough, I suppose, was that you were discovered by an editor on a writing forum. Is that correct?
Yes, I even the story of my breakout success is a story of failure because I had it's interesting to me. 2004 was an interesting year literarily, and I didn't realize this until recently. Stephen King, I'll put myself in the same boat as Stephen King. Long-suffering fan of the Boston Red Sox. You know, a team that up until 2004 had not won a World Series for 86 years, had been widely perceived as laboring under a curse. And so, you know, being a fan of a team like that is, you know, partly a labor of love. You know, it's something you wear on your sleeve. You know, I am a sad sack and I love these sad sacks and we are all sad sacks together.
Yep.
So he set out to write a book about, you know, his year in the bleachers with a buddy of his and what it's like to be, you know, hard scrabble, put upon sad sack fans of a sad sack team that's never going to win. And then the weirdest thing happened. The team won. That was the year that they broke the 86-year curse, and it just happened to be in the middle of Stephen King writing a book about how they were never going to break the curse and what it was like, you know, loving losers. So I had evolved sort of the same notion. Sorry, this sounds really grandiose. In parallel to Stephen King's project, I started something called a blog called Newbie Writes a Novel. And the idea was that, you know, I'd been pushed by a couple friends of mine, including a guy that I talk about a great deal, a writer named Matthew Woodring Stover. I'd been pushed to pay more attention to actually producing prose and actually working on the novel, and to move from that one day I'm gonna phase to, hey, I finished a manuscript.
Yeah.
And so I thought the blog would be the ideal format for this. And I framed it as, you know, newbie writes a novel. Watch watch the futility and the comedy of me trying and failing. And I expected that this thing was going to go on for years and years and years, and it lasted 4 entries. Because on the fourth entry, I posted an excerpt of the novel, and the aforementioned editor, Simon Spanton, was pointed to it by a mutual acquaintance of ours, and on the strength of glancing at that, gave me a call and said, you know, I'd really like to see what else you have to offer. So my brilliant bohemian sort of, you know, Gen X irony drenched comic escapade to not sell a novel accidentally sold a novel.
And I mean, that's quite is it an unusual way around, because you kind of found the publisher before you found the agent, which is, I guess, the traditional way that most people would go about it. You know, I mean, how did that end up working out for you?
And you know, it is and it isn't, because God, okay, there's a lot to break down here. At the time that my first novel was bought, because my first novel was published in 2006, bought in 2004. So this information is now 18 years old. And in some respects, the market hasn't changed a bit, and in some respects, there have been massive sea changes. But some of this is still very applicable. But at the time, the notion of purchasing a manuscript based upon fragment seen online was simultaneously still very rare, but it was kind of a micro trend for a couple of months. I think there were two or three of us. I think John Scalzi also sold one of his early works based upon online excerpts, although I would add the caveat that I think John had the entire work posted online. And John also had, you know, something like a 10-year history of, you know, delivering reviews and other material, you know, to deadline, and you know, and had a lengthy publication history. So he had other credentials that made that less of a gamble. And it didn't really happen again for a while. And you know, it's one of those things that publishers, I suppose, are wise to kind of be shy about, because you don't want to invite the entire world to just fling manuscripts at you. I mean, because the logistical and social difficulty of sorting through piles of manuscripts is difficult enough. When you do it in the traditional fashion, when you sift through piles of paper coming across the transom, or you sift through piles of email in your inbox, any given publishing house, even a big one, only has a certain number of people available to do this on a continual basis. And it can become an insurmountable challenge. I've read slush at a couple publishers, and it's it's curious stuff. It's interesting stuff. I can see why people get very excited when they pull gems out of the gigantic pile.
Yeah.
However, with the caveat that it's, you can see why they don't necessarily encourage it, and you can see why it is still a rare thing. Every editor that I've talked to, every acquiring editor will tell you some variation of the same thing, which is that I'm not required to put my hands in my pocket and whistle innocently and ignore it if I see something that's really, really, really interesting. One of the editors that I've never worked with, who's just a friend of mine, once upon a time said something to the effect of, I run an acquisitions desk. I don't run a blind judged, Olympic sport. I don't have to give everyone a fair shake. And I don't have to ignore good stuff. I mean, that sounds harsh. I don't have to give everyone a fair shake. Editors are very interested in giving people a fair shake because they want to buy good stuff. But what he was saying was that he was not obligated to ignore exciting things if he saw them. He was not obligated to not go out and buy them. So the editor who saw my stuff online went to his purchasing committee and said, I know this is a bit unusual, but I think there really might be something here. And, the cold hard business aspect of it is we should jump on this before somebody else preempts this and gets it before we do. But the leap of faith aspect of it is, I think that there's artistic validity here. I think there's a book that's going to sell. And I actually trust that this weird American that I don't know personally is going to actually be able to finish a novel and add another 600 pages to this fragmentary manuscript that I'm looking at. So it's a fraught and it's a complex process, and I hope that I've done some justice to it, and I hope that I've explained it in such a way that what I've said won't be taken out of context to say, aha, editors have no interest in being nice to people. Editors have every interest in being nice to people and every interest in being excited by what they find. They are desperately thirsty to be excited by what comes their way unexpectedly.
No, that's definitely true, and yeah, we've spoken to some editors as well, and that very much comes across. And it was obviously though quite a big gamble from Simon Spanton's point of view, in the sense that it was just the fragment that you had. You hadn't. I'm right in saying that you hadn't finished it or anything at that point. It wasn't just that you were posting an excerpt; it was that you literally hadn't written it.
No,
at that
was,
point.
yeah, it was, metaphorically speaking, hot off the press. I mean, the ink was not yet dry. I'd written. The thing that had happened was that in 2001, 2002, I started making my living mostly doing freelance and self-published role-playing game stuff. Because that's when Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition had just come out with a license that allowed people to produce third-party support material for it. So there was a big new market for that. And, I was at the time, 23, 24. I lived on nothing. I had no health issues. I wasn't married. I didn't own a car, so I could live on table scraps, which is good because table scraps is what it paid. But it was, it was exciting to get those table scraps. They were mine. But what that process taught me, the couple years I spent doing that, I assembled one extremely large project, a large electronic role-playing book that I had to, edit myself and lay out myself in Quark Express, and I had to proofread it myself and copy edit myself and build the table of contents and build the index. And basically, once I'd done that, I'd accidentally acquired the skill set to construct a lengthy project. And I found that after I'd done that and I returned to fiction, previously I had just been churning out, a page and then throwing it away, and another page and throwing it away. I started writing the Lies of Locke Lamora about 100 times. There were literally 100 false starts. Some of them are just a paragraph, and it would become so obvious on the first page. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea where I was going. I didn't know what anything added up to. And after I constructed this extremely large, less prosical, somewhat boring, if you know what I mean, document that required a lot of indexing, structure, the notion of structure had sunk into my brain a little bit better.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I was able to write what basically almost verbatim what became the prologue to the Lies of Locke Lamora. It's almost all there on the page to this day. That's what I posted, and that's what attracted Simon's attention. And when he called me and said, "Do you have anything else?" I said, "Sure, maybe." And I wrote the first chapter as fast as I could, just a white hot heat of desperation, just boom. And I handed that into him, and he said, "Well, this is also great. What else do you have?" And I said, "Nothing, literally nothing. I wrote that last night. There's nothing else." That's as fast as it comes. And he said, "Well, let me get back to you." And after a couple of days, he did. They decided to take the gamble, and
Wow.
it worked out the way it did.
Yeah.
And
Which I absolutely love Lies of Locke Lamora. It's genuinely one of my favourite books. So I'm glad they did take that gamble.
Thank you. And it was not always smooth sailing. I mean, the thing is that having sold the novel, all I then had to do was learn how to actually write a novel. And even knowing how structure worked at that point, even knowing what I wanted to do, I mean, we had a very optimistic schedule for it. And it still took about 5 months longer than I expected. Like, the book was originally slotted for an optimistic late 2005 publication, and wound up going to early summer of 2006. So there was a bit of a slip, but I feel it was a very understandable first time slip.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. And where did the concept for the book come from? Was it something that had been bubbling away? I mean, it sounds like it was. You started it all these times. The idea, was it the character, or was it the whole story? What was bubbling away first in your head for a while?
It was a whole set of different ideas as I was kind of casting about for, what do I want to write? What do I want to make? And I would just have this intermittent stream of ideas that I would look at, and I would say, okay, but if I adjusted this, it would be more interesting. And then, one by one, very steadily over the course of a couple of years, I mean, what I started, I started with the notion that I wanted to, write a con artist. I wanted to write somebody who was socially adept and physically in trouble, which is Locke, basically. Believe it or not, I'd played. You have to believe it because I'm saying it, but no, this is one of those fun things that happened. Sometime around late 1999 or early 2000, I briefly played a Star Wars role-playing game. That was the not the original West End Games version, but the Wizards of the Coast version. Which is now 2 or 3 Star Wars games in the past.
Yeah.
It's now Games Archaeology. But they had this thing called a Force Adept, which was sort of an informally someone who's gifted with the Force but has never received the formal training of a Jedi or a Sith. So they could do interesting stuff rather than sharp and deadly and devastating stuff. And I conceived of the notion of, what if there was this planet that was sort of out of the way and had always managed to be out of the way for the duration of galactic history. Like, no matter what happened, Rise of the Sith, Rise of the Republic, Rise of the Empire, Fall of the Republic, etc., they'd always just managed to avoid the worst of everything that was going on because there was this tiny little group of sort of a cross between con artists and secret agents, provocateurs, as it were, that were sort of out and about in the galaxy, finessing affairs to make sure that this little planet never got trampled under the boots of bigger galactic trouble. So the character I played was one of these agents, and his name was Locke. And that was the first iteration of the character that became Locke Lamora. We only played the game for like 3 sessions.
Hmm.
Um, and I sort of transported the concept into my slowly coming to life notion for a fantasy novel. Um, and one of the original conceptions was that Locke would have some kind of magic power. And I decided at a fairly early stage that I was going to ditch all of that, that the concept of Locke being hypnotic or having the ability to magically turn himself invisible just was not what I was after. I wanted a narrative in which the protagonists were less resourceful when it came to the supernatural than most of their antagonists were.
Hmm.
And we're just kind of stuck to make their way in a world that is, uh, relatively full of hostile and mysterious magic and other things. And I found that interested me so much more. Also, the setting was originally more what you might call a high classic European medieval, 13th century sort of setting. And I rapidly realized that that was not what I was interested in for this, and that um, I needed a world that was more socially and economically open. I needed I did not need to be in the 13th century. I needed to be in the 15th, 16th, 17th. I needed that level of social mobility, that
Hmm.
level of because somebody like Locke, just you can't exist in the same way in a society that is too closed off, that doesn't have enough paperwork, that doesn't have enough cubbyholes for people
Yeah.
to get lost in. It's very difficult to be, I've used this example before. It would be very difficult to be, a con artist, a traditional con artist living amongst, like the Rohirrim
Yeah.
in Middle Earth, because everybody knows everybody, and everybody's social
Mhm.
status is based on their relationship to everybody else. And it's very difficult to just walk in and say, "Hello, I'm Glamdwong, cousin of Gromdor, and Gromdor is right over there, and he's never heard of you." So the world's got to be bigger than that. It's got to be looser than that. It's got to have places to hide. So basically, the form of what I wrote evolved out of the necessity of all the stuff that I found interesting. And then just a healthy dose of all of the this is a notion that Stephen Bruce has, which I think he calls the awesome shit theory of literature, which is that the ultimate purpose of literature, apart from any art or craft you cram into it, is to put as much awesome shit as the author desires into as small a page space as possible. So obviously I'm really enamored of the whole aesthetic of people in cloaks running around rooftops stabbing each other with daggers at midnight. I think that's absolutely great and hilarious fun. And so I wanted my work to be absolutely drenched in the aesthetic of that sort of thing,
Yeah.
of tavern brawls and rogues in the
Mhm.
shadows and mysterious figures running away in the alleyways, all those classic tropes and classic cliches.
And it's funny because the setting is often compared to kind of fantasy version of Venice. And was that always the kind of image you had in your mind when you were creating the story, or is that something which kind of came organically as you were writing?
Well, I did. I did eventually conform some aspects of Camorr to Venice. Because partway through the creation process, at some point, I realized, hey, wait a minute, I'm I'm basically recreating Venice. So I thought I would,
Hmm.
wink, wink, nudge, nudge, make some of the parallels a little more obvious. I didn't want to just do Venice with the serial numbers filed off, but
Hmm.
Yeah.
it's a city of islands and canals that will,
Yeah.
if Locke's world lasts long enough, eventually have a major subsidence and flooding problem. But it did seem to fit, and it's one of those things where it's like this is the Theron world is an analog of basically the entire Mediterranean world. The Therons are Italian and French and Greek and Moroccan and basically a hodgepodge, and Spanish, and a hodgepodge of all of this. And I'd I'd been thinking consciously of other Italian city-states of the late medieval period and the Renaissance, Genoa and Florence in
Hmm.
particular. And I guess it was just one of those blind spots. It's like, hey, wait a minute. You've been researching Florence, you've been researching Genoa, you got pictures of Florence all over the damn place. Have you not noticed that you're actually writing Venice? Oh, duh. So it was a bit of a serendipitous parallel that I then leaned into completely. I mean, there's uh, uh, other than the fact that Camorr is a bit Venice, there's really no specific analog to any. I mean, the whole Theron throne situation has a little bit of a fallen Roman Empire feeling to it.
Hmm.
Except Rome wasn't blasted completely off the face of the earth. It remained a center of power in which things like the Vatican could spring up. Yeah, Tal Varar doesn't represent a specific city on Earth. Emberlane doesn't represent a specific city on Earth, though. It's a lot of it is borrowed bits and pieces from the Dutch Republic of the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries. Um, you know, Cyrune is not based on anywhere in the real world. Jerem and Jeresh and Ispara, and I mean, there's a there's a certain level of analog that I'm comfortable with, and there's a certain level that I'm not.
Yeah.
Like I'm a huge Ray Feist fan, and I think that what he did was simultaneously kind of cute and simultaneously not what I was really willing to do, which is that he's got his uh quasi-European medieval landscape, and it's dotted with cities and states and dukedoms and so on and so forth, and some of them are very explicitly like this is the place that represents France, this is the place that
Yeah.
represents Germany, this is the place that represents Spain, which is, I mean, I'm making this sound lazy, I'm making this sound terrible for some reason. It's just his way of establishing this is how these linguistic groups, and this is how these names, and this is how these customs and these dress senses pop into this world, because in this world they don't come from, say, France, they come from Bastyra. um and I
It,
thought that
it,
was
it, it,
neat, but I wasn't willing to go that far.
I mean, it can be helpful to readers as well in a way, can't it? Because although you're creating this secondary world, um, if there are things that call back to the real world, then that can help the reader jump into that world more easily if there are certain parallels between the real world and the
Yeah.
secondary world. It,
Oh
it,
yeah.
it helps with the world building massively, I think, if you can think, well, that's a bit like Spain or that's a bit like Venice or things like that. I think it,
Yeah, whether you like it or not, I mean, as an artist and as a craftsperson, the real world is going to cast a shadow into your
yeah,
work. And you can you need to accept that if you're going to be mentally healthy about it. And you need to accept that some of it is going to be completely unconscious, but you can make a decision as to how you're going to consciously use it. You can make a decision as to how and when you're going to employ it. And you might find that, I mean, just as you said, you can borrow a lot of power from the mythic and historic precedents that exist in our own world.
hmm,
There are hints of real world mythologies in Locke's world. There are shadows of omens, and there are metaphors, and there are places that obviously draw strength from stuff that exists on our planet in our time. Um, and like I said, that's unavoidable. So I'm kind of the attitude of you might as well try to be conscious about it and careful about it,
hmm.
and use it for that power when you can get a little something out of it.
And I read actually recently you were having it on Twitter a discussion with Laura Lamb about the financial system of the world.
Oh
And
yeah.
you'd clearly gone into some depth in planning it because I think you said even in that conversation that it was just fun. You enjoyed building out that world, that world how the finance would work in that world and stuff. Do you think that part of your process has been, you were working on these tabletop role playing games and things like that? Do you think that has played an influence in how you structure your stories and create your world?
Oh, I mean, absolutely, absolutely. But the thing is that when it comes to my work, I mean, when it comes to most of my fiction, I mean, the thing that I've discovered is that it's a process of actively and consciously decoupling what I do in my fiction from the expectations of what's going on in a role-playing game.
Mhm.
9 times out of 10, I mean, unless players are consenting to play something that is deliberately obstreperous, that is deliberately complicated, um, you know, one copper piece, 10 of those equals a silver piece, and 10 silver pieces equals a gold piece, and 10 gold pieces equals a platinum piece. And that's just the way it is. I mean, this is an abstract system that is designed to make things easy for players and game masters to understand.
Mhm.
But that's not how a realistic fictional world works. A realistic currency doesn't have a steady exchange rate, and it doesn't come in easy to use denominations like that, and it can be maddeningly bizarre and
Yeah.
archaic and influenced by a number of idiosyncratic factors that are not the sort of thing that most people picking up a game book are really looking for. They're not very few people pick up a Dungeons and Dragons manual and say, confuse me more. I want to know less about how to play this game. I want to be more irritated with all the tables in the back. I mean, there's so much information there. There's so much to put across that basically, if you want to include confusion and idiosyncrasy as a fundamental aesthetic of the world, it's up to an individual game master to put that in. It's not really the publisher's duty to supply that. And so I found that what I need to do in writing my fiction is that I need to file all of that orderliness off the world, all of
Right. Yeah.
that because the assumption of a game is that on some level a game, even if it's a very difficult game, has to have a certain degree of fairness or a certain degree of
Mhm.
access to fairness.
Mhm.
You can get your hands on weapons, you can get your hands on armor, you can get your hands on money. Otherwise, what's the point of playing the game? This is not necessarily true in a realistic world. This is not necessarily true in Locke's fictional world. So all of those lovely little details that are so orderly and so cleanly presented in the form of a role-playing book are not actually conducive to the aesthetic that I want to bring across on the page. Someone who's living a story in what I consider to be a more realistic-ish fantasy world.
Mhm.
I'm a huge gamer. I've been a tabletop gamer for 30 years now, and computer games, video games, et cetera, et cetera. And video games are chock full of notions that support video games very adequately, but do not translate uh, sensibly to actual fiction.
Mhm.
Everything about how currency works, how weapons work, how armor works, how the world works. I would strongly caution anybody who wants to get into writing fiction on a serious basis, no matter how much you appreciate games, disentangle yourself from their notions of logistics and sociology and material culture, and do more real world primary source research,
Mhm.
or at least well researched secondary sources if you can. Don't rely upon video games, because video games are chock full of distortions.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to turn that into a screed against video games, but yeah, ideally you want to preserve the scent, like it's all part and parcel, because now we've been living with role playing games for so long. Tabletop role playing games, as a culture, an industry, a hobby, just about 50 years ish old at this
Mhm.
point. And so they've gone from being a very new thing to a sort of semi talked about thing. Like when I broke into the publishing industry, it was still sort of a hush hush thing, like, oh, such and such used to game, the open secret that, George R. R.
Mhm.
Martin played Champions. China Mieville played Dungeons and Dragons. Matthew Woodring Stover played Champions, et cetera, et cetera. And now it's completely bog standard. It's normal for authors to play Dungeons and Dragons. Ann Leckie plays Dungeons and Dragons. My wife founded the Dungeons and Dragons Club at her high school 35-ish years ago. It used to be the thing that was not spoken of, and now it's completely baked into the fabric of things. But the thing is that those games were designed imperfectly and incompletely to sort of simulate a literary experience.
Hmm.
Wouldn't it be fun to be a character adventuring through a Jack Vance landscape, through a Robert E. Howard landscape, through a Tolkien landscape, or to put all of these landscapes in a blender and spew them back into a game? And so first you have you've got this entertainment that mimics an existing entertainment, but then you have new entertainments that mimic the entertainment that mimicked the entertainment. So the,
Yeah.
the layers of influence become recursive. And now sword and sorcery and role playing, I mean, role playing games have become baked into the fabric of our fundamental expectations for what a work of fantasy literature will do and what it will contain and what its characters will be about. I was talking about this on another podcast recently, just the whole concept, talking about Matthew Woodring Stover's work, just the whole concept of, in a sensible fantasy world, in a functional fantasy world, the idea that there's a career path called adventuring doesn't make any fucking sense. We have adventurers in our world. We call them mercenaries. We call
Yeah.
them sociopaths, looters, raiders, robbers. The idea that there's going to be a formalized path for picking up a sword and a shield and just going out into the world and beating people up and taking their stuff. Well, yes, we have those people, but they tend to get hung at crossroads. It's not necessarily a reputable thing to be, but that is a format through which players at a table can readily experience, a fictional fantasy world. The concept of the adventuring party, the concept of the spell slinging freelancers. Um, and it's one of those things that it's like, yeah, borrow the positive energy, borrow the enjoyment, borrow the pleasure, but never forget to take a step back and examine all the assumptions of a world like that. It's harder than it looks to create a fantasy environment in which people behaving like gaming adventurers makes a hell of a lot of sense. And I've really only encountered it on a couple occasions done charmingly well.
Hmm.
And in order to do that, I think you kind of have to give in and go all the way and embrace the madness. Nicholas Ames is a writer who comes to mind when I think about stuff like this. A writer who absolutely writes within the idiom of a role-playing type
Yeah.
fantasy and succeeds simply by committing to the bit 110% and going
Hmm.
completely wild with it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Um, have I strayed too far from a coherent point?
No.
I
No.
don't
No.
mean to babble endlessly.
No.
No, very interesting. Because I did want to ask about your process. What is your writing style? Do you sit down and plan all this stuff out in advance? Do you kind of, in terms of the world building or in terms of the actual storyline where it's going? Do you do a lot of drafts? What's your routine?
Um, I am I'm an intense planner.
Yeah.
I build up huge bodies of notes and I build up huge bodies of timelines and sketches and notions of where I want to go because I only work comfortably if I know where I want to go.
Hmm.
I have a writer friend who once said that I mean he's very much not a plotter, not a planner, and he once said something to the effect of I have to write each novel to find out what each novel is about because I don't know when I start. And that sounds like such a romantic and fun discovery process. And I'm sure that it's amazing in its own right. And I can't do that. I would fling myself out a window. I would engage in self-harm. I would push the red button and nuke the world. I can't function like that.
Yeah. It sounds
I
terrifying to me. I have to
I,
say.
I yeah, I cherish the thought of being able to do that. Like I can do it on a smaller basis,
Hmm.
but like I can't do it with a lengthy project. I can't do it with a novel. I've got to have some idea that it would make me feel like I was walking into a job interview, wearing no pants and not knowing what I was interviewing for. I'd just feel completely, exposed to the world, and vulnerable. So I'm an intense plotter, and I always have been. But the thing is, I think it's important to realize that no plan is going to survive lengthy contact with the little fuckers that you're writing about.
Yeah.
If your characters are lively, if your characters are doing their job, it is. I don't mean to get mystical about it. I never mean to say like, oh, the characters write themselves. They have a life of their own. It is not that. It's not a mystical property of the creative process. It is that by the time you spent X number of pages, X number of hours uh writing these characters, opportunities that you did not previously see will suddenly become more obvious to you. You're trying to write from point A to point B to reach point Z, and somewhere around, point C, you might realize that you can fruitfully branch off, go do something else for a little bit, then return to the design you intended. And it's not that some magic has taken place. It's just that you didn't see the angle of approach that was possible when you
Yeah.
started the project. You didn't have enough groundwork.
Mhm.
And so that's a really good way to keep yourself flexible and keep yourself from going crazy. It's also been it's been really helpful to me these past couple of years because I was a big Breaking Bad fan, and an even bigger Better Call Saul fan. Better Call Saul, I
Yeah.
think, is one of the most fascinating and successful writing experiments in the history of any entertainment medium. It's amazing all the things it did that should not have been doable. The fact that it's a genuinely mystifying and completely involving prequel, which goes to interesting places despite the fact that 90% of what must happen by the end of the series.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they took that and they turned it into a strength. But they also, when you look at the behind the scenes featurettes and you watch the interviews with the creators, you begin to realize that Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul look like they have been intensely planned out in the smallest detail from the very beginning, and that's not even remotely true. That there are
Mhm.
major characters in both shows that were only supposed to be there for one appearance or to do one function
Yeah.
that then got brought back in, because the creators realized, either they'd found a perfect actor that they did not want to discard, or that it opened up a storyline that they hadn't previously realized could be explored. So just the fact that so much of these incredibly obsessively detailed and beautifully wrought stories over 11 seasons of television were fortuitous accidents
Yeah.
or sprang from experimentation or simply were not planned in advance at all. It's amazing, and I think it's a little bit heartening. You really ought to realize that, despite what a lot of bad Goodreads reviews will say, the reader really can't tell what your mental state is or was. When a reader
Yeah.
is reading something
That's
you've
right.
written, they don't know how you really felt about it a year ago or
Yeah.
2 years ago or 3 years ago,
Yeah.
because you yourself may not remember it.
Mhm.
I have another writer friend of mine at a workshop once said something to the effect of, once a book is done, if I look at it 5 or 6 years after I wrote it, I know, in a vague sense, that there were parts that I hated and there were parts that I loved. And
Mhm.
flipping through the text, I can't tell which is which. I don't
Yeah.
know, which parts it all reads the same to me now. And I guarantee that it's the same for readers. And if the reader doesn't think so, they're deluding themselves because telepathy isn't a thing. Um, so the an awful lot comes out in the wash. And we as writers tend to get credit for being, ooh, planning geniuses. That's amazing. How could you have possibly seen that coming and set it up 3 books in advance? And nine
Mhm.
times out of 10, the answer is I didn't. The
Yeah.
answer is just I got lucky, or it was a stupid idea and I ran with it, or the book was due to be handed in 2 days and I was writing furiously to make the deadline.
Yeah.
Desperation and planning look an awful lot like each other from
Yeah.
a distance. There's a
Yeah.
section of the Lies of Locke Lamora, roughly 80 pages long, that was written in 24 hours.
Wow.
I
Oh
uh,
wow.
I can't do that now. I could do that when I was 26, but no, I There's an entire section in there that I was desperately behind schedule on, and I knew what I wanted to do, but I just had not succeeded in doing it yet. So I took the whole thing apart, and I just, uh, word processor goes burr. You know, took nearly 24 hours and spat that sucker out in one gigantic marathon of writing.
That's amazing.
Um, it's there. Even I couldn't tell you exactly where it is. It just blends into the
Hmm.
landscape. I'm not saying that that's how everyone should. You should not plan to do that. I'm just saying that it will happen. It will happen dramatically, and it will happen less dramatically. It'll happen in slow and subtle ways too. So planning is great, but leave room for flexibility because flexibility happens.
Yeah.
I just wonder if linked to that is the question of revision and drafts and things like that, where you will be obviously, or normally people are able to smooth those things out and perhaps make things that look amazingly well planned, seem like that thanks to revising drafts and things like that. Are you someone that gets quite a clean first draft, or do you go through a number of drafts before you've got the finished product?
Clean-ish, and I am one benefit of being old rather than being a newly hatched tadpole is I am more patient these days, and I am more cognizant. I mean, there is an element of carelessness and recklessness. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm very proud of the Lies of Locke Lamora, but there's parts of it that are sloppy. There's sloppy mistakes here and there, and there's things that I would have done differently. I mean, there's always things that you do differently if you wrote any given book at a
Hmm.
different point in your life, but there's definitely stuff that I would change on what I think is an objective care level. And I've steadily worked at those bad writing habits to a point that like there's going to be there's a conspicuous prose difference between parts of Lies and say Republic of Thieves, and there's another conspicuous sea change between that and Thorn of Emberlane, in that I'm a lot more fastidious, and I think I'm a lot more conscious about the effect that I want to draw out. I think I've finally arrived at an understanding of what I want to be doing with my prose,
Hmm.
and where I want it to be, more or less for what I hope will be the rest of my career. Um, so sloppiness is a thing that happens. It's unavoidable, but that is the magic of the second draft. I mean, you can even be really obnoxious about it if you want. Sometimes manuscripts are littered with things like insert cool battle here,
Hmm.
Yeah.
or solve problem here, and that's always a real present to find something like that. That's a real treat from your past self. When your past self puts a little note that says, "Please solve insoluble problem
Yeah.
here." And then turn manuscript in. It's like, thanks, asshole.
Yeah.
Um, but it's always worth remembering that everything you see in the arts world can benefit from the editorial process. I mean, some movies are completely built into successes in the editing process.
Hmm.
There's endless
Hmm.
debate as to whether Star Wars is a film that was conceived great or edited great. And there's a strong thread of argument for the possibility that this was edited great, that actually Marsha Lucas played a much bigger role than is generally credited, that this is a hot mess that was assembled into something that turned into an all-time classic. Um, Editing is in itself a form of magic, and the thing is, it gives the impression that all the people involved in a production, or whether that's one person writing a book or 300 people making a movie, were completely on fire all the time
Yeah.
and perfectly smooth and perfectly blessed with wit and insight, when actually what it means is that they had 9 to 12 months to work. People who occasionally people this
Yeah.
is me tooting my own horn, so take it with a grain of salt, but people will sometimes say things like, God, I really love the dialogue. The things that Locke and John say to each other are really clever, and God, you must be witty. And me, no. No, I'm kind of an idiot. But yeah, no, the tremendous advantage I have in terms of wit and wisdom is that I can spend 12 months thinking something up that Locke has to say in 3 seconds.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's the big secret is that he gets the compressed benefit of this slow ticking potato that is inside my skull. You know, and on a long enough timeline, anyone can come up with stuff that, you know, that's the spirit of the staircase, as the French would have it. You know, those the perfect thing that you probably should have said that you think
Exactly.
of,
Yeah.
you know, 3 hours
Totally.
later. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the beautiful thing about being a novelist is all that stuff just goes in the hopper and you can put it into the mouths of your characters and people can say, oh, how witty, oh, how brilliant. And, you know, meanwhile, you're sucking your thumb back at home, not knowing what day of the week it is. Or at least that's my experience.
Looking forward, there's been an announcement of 3 novellas coming out. What can you tell us about them? Are they due soon, or are they in the pipeline?
Yes, little baby untitled Lynch #1, because I'm so uncharacteristically stymied for a title for this damn thing. I'm not used to working on stuff that doesn't have a title. I'm used to having something very firmly in mind.
Yeah.
Even if it's just a placeholder. And then it's little siblings, the Mad Baron's Mechanical Attic and the Choir of Knives.
Mhm.
You should be seeing at least one of them in the coming year. Hopefully more than that.
Awesome.
That's great. And
And I'm hoping that, you know, maybe, just maybe, because I've been gnawing at this problem for months now. Maybe I just maybe might be able to conjure up a title sometime pretty soon so we can at least announce that and say, you know, because Untitled Lynch #1 is a really shitty title for a novel. I don't know if my publishers have ever told anybody that, but it's true. It really is. It's a great name for a contract, poor name for a bookshelf. But and I don't know why. I haven't been able to come up with something.
and is the title, because sometimes we've spoken to authors where, you know, authors will have a great, well, what they view as a great idea for a title, but then the publisher will come in and say, no, that's not a great title, let's use this one instead. I mean, have you always had the control over your titles?
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, the no one has ever really had a complaint about any of my titles so far. I suspect that, I mean, on the other hand, my editors have never shied away from giving me their opinions, commercially or artistically. I mean, no one has ever handled me with kid gloves in that respect. I think that mostly we've just been sort of aesthetically congruent in our taste in titles. And, you know, maybe someday if I screw it up enough, someone will take me out behind the woodshed and say, no, Bad Scott, can't do that. But part of my problem is that Michael Chabon, damn him, he wrote a short novel years ago called Two Gentlemen of the Road, which is actually about con artists and vagabonds, you know, taking a long road trip. And it's like, if he hadn't named his damn book that would be a perfect title for the first novella. And that's one of the things that I'm having trouble getting around, because in my head I keep thinking Two Gentlemen of the Road. Wait, no, that's a Michael Chabon novel.
Yeah.
You know, I would probably sell a lot of copies if I named it The Eye of the World or The Fellowship of the Ring, but, you know, there are issues with doing so. So got to come up with something original.
And are you able to say how Thorn is coming along, Thorn of Emberlane, the next full novel in the series?
Thorn, I think at the moment is actually in a pretty happy spot. I've you know, like I said, I've been pretty open in the last couple months about the fact that I've had some major drug related success in terms of my general and specific anxiety. And I've been working very hard in what you might call a freshened mental state, which again, I hate sounding so overly dramatic about this shit. So I apologize if I do, but it's hard to describe it in other terms. And you know, just the only weirdness I've been discovering in the past couple of months is that, you know, I've been working for the first time in more than a decade without this constant weight of, you know, just brutal asthma attack level anxiety weighing me down. And I'm finding that its absence is something to contend with, as weird as that sounds. I thought that the other day I had a thought that if I ever write an essay about this or try to explain my thoughts about it, the title is going to be something like, "Oh, great, now I'm haunted by the fact that I'm no longer haunted." But it's one of those things where it's like my entire work process, my entire life process for, since my divorce, in 2010, has been it's been in the company of horrendous
Yeah.
anxiety attacks, and they obviously they got in the way, but the thing is they were also omnipresent. And just the fact that they're like, convalescence from an illness is a weird time. The absence of a pain that you've had for a lengthy period of time is a strange new sensation.
Yeah.
We learn to operate, we learn to function in certain ways. We have learned behavior states. And when you remove something that has been so intrinsic to your mental and emotional health, or so detrimental to it for so long, it's weird, and it's been very strange operating on an art and craft level where there's nothing else there except me, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like the constant press of anxiety on top of everything else. It's like, wait a minute, it's just me. And so everything that worries me, everything that attracts my attention, everything that gets in the way is now for the moment just me grappling with my art and my craft, just me looking at my prose, trying to make artistic decisions about it. In the absence of this black cloud that lowered over everything for the better part of 10 plus years. And as weird as it sounds, as wonderful it has been, it has taken some getting used to. Just being kind of here by myself in a quiet head, not having that shit just constantly haunting me.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. When you've carried something like that around with you for so long, it's always going to be, the absence of it is going to be a big deal. It's the same as, I'm thinking of interviews with people that were hostages for years and then get released, and they feel a horrible, even though they're in a better state now, they've got that. Getting used to everything again is obviously a very difficult thing to do, and you have to kind of readapt to it, I think. So it's a similar situation.
It is. It's something that happened. It was, in many ways, it was a part of me. In many ways, it is a part of me. And, there's no getting past that. And, it's a weight that's gone. But, if you've gotten used to walking under, 40 pounds of additional weight
Mm-hmm.
for 10 years, suddenly when it's removed, you kind of need to learn how to walk again. You need to learn how to move again. And I shouldn't be surprised by this, but I have found myself surprised by this. I've been through this process before with other stuff, and it's like, oh shit, it's happening again. So, I'm not saying this by way of, oh, this is a weird complication. I'm saying, oh, this is actually kind of wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm just in kind of a weird headspace at the moment where everything is great, but I don't entirely know what the hell I'm doing at the moment, because I'm still kind of grappling with everything being pretty okay.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, it
so
does
it's the best possible discombobulation I could want. But basically it also means that, even though I've been increasingly happy with every iteration of Thorn of Emberlane, I feel like the decisions I'm making about it now, and the judgments I'm rendering on it now, are probably the clearest and the most accurate that I've ever made. And once they're made, I think I'm just going to, then I'm going to chain myself to the floor and let it go and let it be done.
Yeah.
And that's going to have to be it. But yeah, I don't know how to, I don't mean to whine. I don't mean to express that, like this is miserable. This is not miserable at all. This is great, and I'm having a great time, and I think it means really good things. It's just very strange.
Yeah. No, it does make a lot of sense, but I'm glad that you are feeling that discombobulation in a way, and we're all eagerly looking forward to Thorn whenever it arrives. So. That's great. And before we finish the main questions, I just wondered, would you ever want to write in a different format? Would you ever want to write a screenplay or something like that?
When I was a teenager, I wrote a screenplay. It was kind of the first lengthy project I ever finished. I wrote a screenplay for a really bad cyberpunk movie that I was going to shoot on video with some friends of mine, and we never did this because wrangling high schoolers is just the most difficult thing on earth. But miracle of miracles, I actually finished the script. I was discovering film at that point. I'd be I'd become a big connoisseur of movies, and would rent them every weekend. And I was when I was 16, 17, I was finally free to roam, and I could drive the car, and I could go out and I could see movies my parents wouldn't take me to. So the world was just opening up in a lot of ways. So writing a screenplay then was very exciting. I don't honestly know if I could want to do it these days. And it's weird because I know several writers that absolutely flourish in the screenplay medium. Like my buddy Saladin Ahmed, who was not having a great time in the prose world, despite the fact that he's a brilliant prose stylist. Discovered for whatever reason that writing scripts for comic books was something that he could do with clockwork professional regularity, and exist in that environment as a completely reliable creator in a way that, like, I don't think I could. I mean, I read these scripts. I'm a big Sandman fan.
Mm-hmm.
And I read now and then screenplay excerpts from movies or TV shows that I really like, and they are fascinating artifacts. But I'm not entirely sure that I'm clued enough into that process, or want to be able to turn out a good one. If someone were to put me on point about it and say something like, we'll give you $500,000 to write a screenplay. Okay. I feel that, that's a bag of money is a valid artistic motivation. But like, barring that, no, I don't write screenplays for fun. And it's something that I maybe kind of want to do. It's a bucket list item rather than I'm very excited to do this as a sideline. There's a couple different styles of prose that I would like to play with sooner rather than later. And game design and game writing is also something that I really want to play with. So it's possible that my subsidiary interests have just kind of shifted over time from screen and script writing to other stuff.
What was the last book that you read?
The last book that I read, which I was crowing about on Twitter, is a book called The Auctioneer by a woman named Joan Samson. And it's a novel. It's an American. It's sometimes pitched as horror or quasi horror, though it's not actually a supernatural horror novel. But it is a suspense novel. It's an almost Flannery O'Connor meets Shirley Jackson in New England sort of
Cool.
Physical suspense and social suspense, and it's an astounding book. It's harrowing, and it's relevant to everything around us after 50 years, and it's a shame. The author Joan Samson died very young. She had a brain tumor. And she passed away literally just weeks after the book was published.
Oh, no.
And that was a tragedy. And based on just the sheer firepower of The Auctioneer, I mean, we were all robbed, clearly. I mean, the woman would have really been something. And the book, I mean, the book was a minor sensation at the time, and there was discussion of making it a movie, and it was on the bestseller list for a little while. And then kind of faded into obscurity. And there's been a concerted effort on the part of a couple people to kind of bring it back into the spotlight and get it reprinted. And I didn't know what to expect going into it, and I found myself just absolutely flabbergasted just by how powerful and infuriating and harrowing it was. So yeah, The Auctioneer. Awesome. And the other thing I was reading simultaneously was I'm finally reading Rabbit Run by John Updike. So
Oh yeah.
that's my hoity-toity literary note. John Updike, who is I mean, at least at the time he wrote this novel, just a prose stylist that will make your eyes pop open as wide as dinner plates. I mean, there are sentences in this novel to just make me, whew, good Lord. So yeah, I'm having a good reading week. It's been good stuff.
Excellent.
Nice. What about the last film that you watched?
The last film that we watched was Prey.
Oh yeah, yeah, I really liked it. I thought
Prey,
it
which
was
was
a
yeah,
really,
which was
really
a
good
lot of
lean
fun. A
action film.
nice,
Yeah.
not perfect. Could have been finessed in, like, it could have been finessed in a couple of ways to make it, I think, an all-time classic. But you know what? It's a very good, very brisk, very
Hmm.
charming movie. Great cast, great atmosphere, beautifully shot, good ideas, really amusing, doesn't outstay its welcome. Just
Yeah.
a charming movie of the sort that I wish they made more of these days.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's the last TV show that you watched or are watching at the moment?
I finished Better Call Saul, like I said,
Hmm.
which left me staggered.
Yeah.
And my wife and I are currently watching we're watching Ms. Marvel, which we are really enjoying, which we find extremely energetic and charming.
Nice.
We are watching Star Trek Strange New Worlds,
Oh yeah, just
which
finished that
we've
actually. I
almost
thought that
finished,
was
which is dumb as a box of hammers, but incredibly charming. I love everybody on this show. It is loads of fun. It is Star Trek that is trying to be actual Star Trek, so
Yeah.
I forgive it
yeah.
its faults because it's just goddamn, it's fun and uplifting and pleasant and
Yeah, I thought it was the best new Trek they've done since it came back. To be
oh
honest.
yeah, it's so much fun. It's so nice.
Yeah.
Um and shit, what else are we recently
See,
watched Julia, which is an eight-part series. I think it's an HBO limited
Oh yeah.
series
Yeah.
about the first year of the existence of the French chef Julia
yeah.
Child's TV series that made her famous. And it's a shockingly good series. Brilliantly acted. Everyone in it is wonderful. It's heartfelt. It's chock full of publishing jokes because it has prominent guest roles for editors and publishers. And it speaks a lot to the creative process, and it's full of stuff that creatives in any field will look at and go, "Oh shit, I feel personally attacked." I was really pleasantly surprised. It's a really, really, really good
Nice.
series.
Excellent.
Cool.
Before that, Midnight Mass. That's Mike Flanagan's
Yeah.
last. It's a seven-part supernatural horror. Uh, I think the term is limited series, not a mini series, not a series, limited series.
Yeah.
Um,
That's on my list to watch at some point.
it's
Yeah.
superb. It's
Yeah. I've
great.
heard great things
It's
about it.
beautiful. It's brilliantly acted. It's sharply written. It's beautifully shot. It's an adaptation of a Stephen King story that never existed. It is the most
Cool.
Stephen King story, non-Stephen King thing that is it's perfect. The story of
Awesome.
a small New England town that is haunted not just by literal monsters, but by
Yeah.
its history.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely spellbound by it. I think it's absolutely fucking great. Midnight Mass, I recommend unreservedly.
Excellent. Have you
Nice.
watched
Oh,
The
I'm very
Sandman
excited
yet?
for that.
Oh yeah, we did finish The Sandman last week. Um, I wasn't sure how I felt at first, but I liked it more and more and more as the season went on, and I wound up thinking that it was in as much as it's always going to be impossible to make something that is both completely inviting to a new audience and completely
Yeah.
satisfying to the existing
Yeah.
audience, because
Yeah.
I've been a Sandman fan for 30 years now. Um, I think it has many more high points than it does points to quibble with. The cast is excellent, absolutely excellent. Um, and basically, I had no more qualms or concerns by the time we got to the bonus episodes. I really enjoyed it. I absolutely love the music. The sense of atmosphere is very good. The actors playing the Endless are
Yeah.
excellent.
They are.
I saw a random comment on YouTube to the effect of, "Gee, it was nice that desire could find the time to take a break from work to play themselves in the miniseries. I quite agree. I was
Nice.
generally very, very chuffed, and I hope it gets a continuation.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And actually, on TV shows, has there ever been any chance of Locke Lamora appearing on screen in any form at all?
I believe we are on we've been through 4 rounds of optioning. Warner Brothers optioned it to try to make it a theatrical movie back in 2006, 2007, and it's probably for the best that nothing ever came of that, because the material really doesn't fold into that box very
Yeah.
neatly. And the cinematic moment they were trying to meet has long since passed. They were looking for another Pirates of the Caribbean-esque PG-13 fantasy franchise, and my material was never going to provide that. Come on, guys.
No.
But no, it was fun at the time. You know, I got paid, so at least there's that. Every option discussion since then has been predicated on the idea that it's going to be a TV series or a streaming series or a limited series of some sort, which I think is a much more natural fit for the material.
Yeah.
So some of those have been very, very interesting. There have been some really committed and genuinely creative people involved, and I've had a lot of good conversations. But they've just never gone anywhere, economically speaking. And I wish I could drop hints and wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and say, boy, there might be something right around the corner. At the moment, there's nothing really exciting cooking. That could change tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm not sitting on any gigantic visual adaptation news, alas. And it's also entirely possible that once more of my stuff starts getting out, that certain floodgates might open in that respect as well, because I think there's probably a lot of fairly reasonable trepidation around undertaking the adaptation of an unfinished fantasy series for some reason at the moment. So yeah, no big news, but it's been tried, and it will be tried
Excellent.
again, I hope. Fingers crossed.
Well, fingers crossed. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, the very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or. And I always say there's no right answers apart from one, but we'll start off with A Song of Fire and Ice or The Witcher.
Oh yeah. I'm much later to The Witcher than I am to A Song of Ice and Fire. So I'm charmed by the TV series, and I love all the actors, and I think it's a very the TV series is an outstandingly fun hot mess that captures a certain sword and sorcery sensibility. Don't expect lengthy narrative coherence. Expect fun, stupid fun, and it's atmospheric, great.
Nice.
Loads of fun. But in that equation, I'm Song of Ice and Fire.
Cool.
Nice.
TV or cinema?
Oof. Jeez. I don't know if I can pick one. I love the sensation of being at a movie, of being in a cinema, of the darkening screen and the ritual. I mean, the pandemic has taken that from us for a couple of years now. I really haven't been able to do that, but like even movies that I wasn't necessarily really looking forward to, like I see nearly every Marvel movie. I think of Marvel movies as fun movies to see once.
Yeah.
I don't obsess over them past that, but they are an awful lot of fun to see with we live right across the street from a college. So our little theater in the area is usually like on opening night for a Marvel movie or a science fiction movie, the theater will be chock full of kids, 20-year-olds, and vicariously watching them completely lose their shit. The characters they love and the deaths that they don't expect, and watching their emotional reactions and watching them tear their hair out. It's very difficult to simulate that. So I guess I would say cinema by a hair.
Okay.
Okay. Night Owl or Early Bird?
Oh, Night Owl. Oh God, no. I trend toward Batman hours, whether I like it or not. I'm constantly trying to be a little more human, but no, left to my own devices, I'm completely a middle of the night person, and I have been my entire life.
Cool.
Music or no music when you write?
Oh, music. Nice.
And last one, real book or ebook?
90% of the time, real book. I have finally, after a number of years of trying, become enamored of my Kindle because
Nice.
I've discovered the situations where I prefer it to physically holding a real book.
Yeah.
90% of the time, I'm still going to be an analog man, though.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
That's Tarek's wrong answer.
That's the one I always push for the ebook one.
He
But
always wants people
very
to say
few people
ebook there.
agree with me.
I've reconciled myself to actually enjoying the experience a little bit here and there because I used to just not be an ebook. I'm just old enough that like I'm still very archaic in a couple of respects, and I'm a late adopter of ebooks, but I think I've finally found my niche.
Oh, that was a really fun chat. I really enjoyed that. Such a nice guy, and some really fascinating hints and tips, I think, for people out there. And,
Yeah, definitely.
And what an interesting way to get into the industry. Writing on a forum, putting something out there, and then from that little seed, this massive.
Yeah, amazing
industry
to
that
be
he's-
picked up when he hadn't even, that's basically all he had written of
I
Locke
know.
Lamora, and to be picked up at that point, and then obviously go on to the success that he's had is incredible. And also I thought it was interesting because he said that the character of Locke was almost born out of a character that he'd been playing in an RPG
That's right.
game, and those differences, because some people do sometimes think, oh, I'm playing, I've created this great D&D campaign, could I just turn this into a book? But definitely it can help, as he was saying,
yeah,
but also
sure.
there's massive differences between fiction and a game system, and I thought he was quite good at explaining what those differences were there.
Yeah, no, it was a really interesting chat, and his kind of openness about his mental health issues was really
Mm-hmm.
refreshing, I suppose, as well, and the impact and the changes that he's felt and how that's impacted him as a writer over the last 10
Yeah,
years.
absolutely. I mean, first of all, just great that he is, personally found some medication that's helping with that, and that, regardless of the writing, that's great news. But
yeah.
also totally understand what he was saying about having lived with that anxiety for so long. It's now a new process of trying to get used to not having it there as well.
Yeah.
So, but it sounds like, things are on the up, which is great. And, I really can't wait to read the next part of Locke Lamora's story, whether it's in the novellas or, of course, the fourth book,
Yeah,
which
it sounds
we
like-
will hopefully see soon.
There's a lot more stuff coming in this world for fans of it, I think, which is always fantastic news.
Yep. So thanks very much to Scott for coming on to the podcast. Really appreciate the time that he took to do that. And obviously, if you want to buy his books, we'll put links in the podcast description. But next week, we're staying in the world of fantasy.
Yeah, next week we're chatting with Richard Swan, who is a pretty massive fantasy author with The Justice of Kings. It's the first book
Huge
in his
debut,
Art of
yeah.
War trilogy. And he's an interesting guy, really nice guy, really interesting stuff. And he's billed as a debut author, and he's someone who actually had self-pubbed some sci-fi
Yeah.
books before. So that interesting way that the publishers market you, depending on how they want you to be seen by the public when you have a book coming out.
Yeah, totally. That was fascinating because I think, these sci-fi, he'd written quite a few sci-fi books and
Yeah.
self-pubbed them. And then, treated as a debut, obviously gets onto the Sunday Times bestseller list as well. So, we chat to him all about that, and,
very interesting.
including the tactics that you can use to get onto the Sunday Times
Yeah,
bestseller
that's
list.
right. How to game the system.
Exactly,
Richard Swan.
which was very interesting in and of itself. So yeah, he's a really fun guy. It's another great chat. So please do tune in for that one next week. But before we go, I haven't said this for the past few episodes, I don't think, because they were pre-records. But if you enjoyed the episode, please do take the time to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or whatever your favorite podcast app is, because these things really help us to continue to get great guests on the podcast.
And of course, if you would like to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page 1.
I'm going to jump in here because, of course, there is minor issues happening with Twitter at the moment as well.
Elon Musk alert.
So you can still get us on Twitter, obviously, and we will still be there till the bitter end. But for those of you that have migrated across to Mastodon, which I know more and more people are, and especially there's a good community of writers there. We are at page one pod at writing.exchange. So please do give us a follow, drop us a message there. We'd love to chat to you there. And as I say, it does seem to be a really great burgeoning writing community on that app, whether or not Twitter succeeds in surviving at this point.
Yeah, as you say, we'll be there in the wastelands, just
Yes.
chatting to the three-headed lizards. But yeah, it's always good to have more spots to chat writing for sure. One of which is always email, of course, which you can send as an email by sending that email to, I can't believe I'm saying this, so send us an email to podcast@writegear.co.uk.
It has been a few weeks since you've had to remember that.
With this part.
Exactly. But yeah, no, that's great. We'd love to hear from you on any of these formats. Please do get in touch. We love to hear guest suggestions as well. So if you've got any of those as well, please let us know. But otherwise, have a great week, and we'll speak to you next episode.
See you later.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well, so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page 1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.